Hello, everybody. Today I am here with the beautiful Symone Fairchild coming to us from Los Angeles, California. Symone, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're up to?
Sure. My name is Symone Fairchild, like you mentioned. And oh goodness, I am an actress. I'm a screenwriter. I'm a producer, a budding director. I'm being called in that direction. Don't know when, but it's there. And I am a warrior for God. Absolutely am 100% spiritual. That is the core of who I am. I'm a single mom to the most amazing 8-year-old boy in the world. I'm also a master of Chen Shenpai, which is Northern Shaolin Kung-Fu. I became a master about, I think 2 years ago. I've been doing it since I was 3.5.
Well, that's impressive. So I am very curious about how you got to all of these things. And I'm interested in the tie-in between your spirituality and the study of martial arts too. Can we start there? Is there a tie-in for you?
You know what? There is. And surprisingly, it didn't come until later. It didn't come maybe until 4 years ago. I didn't put the two things together until I had to do a lot of unpacking of who I was and what I had gone through in the last 8 years. If one studies martial arts the way they're meant to, and not just the physical aspect of it, which has come along with the commercialization of martial arts, there are several aspects to martial arts other than the physical aspect. You have the physical, yes, but you also have the spiritual. And the spiritual is way more important than the physical. You have to be one with yourself. You have to respect yourself and others. You have to be aware of your personal surroundings and the surroundings of others. There is a centeredness that needs to happen before you can handle the responsibility of the physicality of martial arts. Otherwise, you're like these little kids going to school, trying out your kicks and your punches on other kids. That's stuff that's cool in films. I was trained very well. Of course, I hated it when I was a kid. I was a little girl. I wanted to go outside and jump around and be a cheerleader and do, gymnastics. And it was a way of life for myself and my family. My father is the worldwide master of our style. And there was no letting up of martial arts in our household. That was our way of life. And so after school was martial arts. On weekends, martial arts. Summer, martial arts camp. Forever. And back in those days, we had to do push-ups on like cinder blocks, and we had to break cinder blocks when we got our black belts. And it was really hardcore. I came up sparring. Nowadays, kids are broken up into girls fight the girls based on age and rank and whatnot. I was just too strong to spar the girls. So I came up sparring the boys and a lot of the male instructors. And I was pretty good. So it's weird because I was the quiet one in the family, but yet I was the fighter. It was
okay.
Yeah.
This is so interesting. All right. Let's talk a little bit about how you got to that place, to starting out in the family with the martial arts priority there. So where were you born?
I was born in Maryland. No, I was born in D.C. actually. And I grew up in and around like the Fort Washington, Oxon Hill area. And then my family eventually moved to the Mitchellville area. So a little bit outside between Washington, D.C. and the Virginia state line.
Okay. And then how long did you live in Maryland?
I lived in Maryland until I went to college.
Oh, wow. Okay. So your whole entire childhood. Mm-hmm. All right. So growing up in Maryland, you were in a family where your father was heavily into martial arts and now is the leader, the master of this type of martial arts that you practice. That's absolutely fascinating. So as a little small girl, what's one of the first things you remember in your family or in your life overall?
The first things I remember was that we worked really hard and all the time.
What kind of work?
We're an entrepreneurial family. So martial arts is an art. My parents' mode to take care of us was through our martial arts academies, our schools.
Okay.
So when I was young, we had this fantastic school that to me as an adult, it's the school, like my favorite school where I grew up and fell down and learned everything. It was in D.C. on Kennedy Street.
Okay.
D.C. And it was wonderful.
So did your parents own the school?
They did, yes. They've always owned. Mm-hmm.
So you went to a regular school and then you went to this martial arts academy.
Yes.
From what age did you start at the martial arts academy?
3.5.
3.5. Do you have any memories before that?
I don't.
So your first memories have to do with this academy because it was such a big part in your life. Can you think of a story from when you were really little and started out in your martial arts academy? Something that might have happened?
Does it have to do with martial arts?
No.
Okay. So my dad had this friend who actually is still in our lives now. And I think he's a master now. His name is Master Tayari Cassell. And he bred boa constrictors. And he would always bring the new hatchlings up to the school. And he had this little teeny duffel bag. And he would bring the little hatchlings. It would be like maybe 5 or 6 of them in there. And I was just so excited. I was such an animal lover. And when he would bring the little hatchlings up to the school, you couldn't pull me away. All the other kids were like, oh, this is so scary. This is so gross. I wanted them all. But of course, my mom's no. And at the time, we had so many animals at home. We had dogs, and I snuck a cat in the house. We had sharks. We had eels. We had stingrays, lionfish, birds. You
had sharks?
Yeah, we had nurse sharks.
Oh, my goodness.
And we loved animals. But that was my introduction into loving animals with the little boa constrictor babies.
Wow. So it sounds like you just had this really nurturing family.
I had a cool little childhood, yeah.
So tell me about this.
I learned a lot of strength, and I learned who I was and how I should be in the world. I learned attributes as a human being that I didn't quite understand or weigh as heavily until I got to Hollywood, until I got into entertainment.
Okay.
What I learned from my dad really helped me understand why it's important to be a very good person, why it's important to care about others, why it's important to have integrity and be honest, why it's important to put others ahead of yourself, just to be a good person in the world. I learned integrity and character through what I learned in martial arts in my childhood.
Yeah, because isn't there a lot to do with discipline, but also a lot to do with understanding that you have the power to really hurt someone, and also the power to protect yourself. So it must breed a lot of like self-confidence, self-love, but also at the same time, personal, like social responsibility, because you know that if you really wanted to, you could take someone down.
Yes. That's like a double-edged sword though, because when you are aware that you have that type of power, how do I explain this? Put it this way. Before I started sparring mostly males, I had a friend in the school. Her name was Kia, and we were in the same weight class. So I would always end up having to spar her, and I would never, ever win. I would never let myself go full force. I would always let her win because I didn't want to hurt her.
Okay.
I've always been that way.
But you could have won.
I could have. I was quite a bit taller than her and I had a longer reach. But I could have, but I just would never do it. And my dad never understood it. He's like, why don't you? I'm like, but she's my friend. I can't hurt her.
How old were you when this was happening?
11, yeah.
So you had a real awareness, really an awareness of other people and their feelings.
Yeah, I did.
You must have had a lot of empathy. Where do you think that came from?
I think some of what I am, I was born with, I've come to understand. And that was enhanced through the training, like greatly enhanced through my training with martial arts and through the discipline of the martial arts and through the spiritual aspect of the martial arts and being centered. I have come to understand that everything that I've been through in my life has been meant to accentuate what I was born with. And it's amazing to look back on it all.
It is. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on with the mind and consciousness, it sounds like. So even from as a small child, you had a lot of sense of not only your personal responsibility, but also the idea of how to center yourself and have almost, it feels like a sense of peace. Like you wanted to preserve the relationship with this other little girl. You had a sense of what she was going through, and that really demonstrates a huge maturity.
Well, thank you.
So did this come through in any other areas of your life, this ability, like at that age when you were in, say, from 10 till through your teenage years or middle school?
It did. I found myself standing up for other kids. Whereas I was a very quiet child, very quiet, very reserved, stuck to myself, I never ever ran with the popular kids. I didn't get in trouble. But if there was someone that was getting hurt or felt left out, my dad would say, "You're always bringing stray cats home." And I was always bringing the kids home that either didn't have any friends or were always sitting by themselves or were being bullied or whatever. And I was bullied as a kid, but I handled it pretty well, to be honest.
Do you have a story about that?
I have two.
Okay.
One was pretty bad. I was molested as a child. It ended when I was 9. I'm not sure when it began, and that was never really, justice was never sought, put it that way. And I think I was 13, there was a girl in school, this was middle school, her name was Tracy Johnson. And for some reason, she just decided she wanted to pick on me. And it just went on and on and on. And finally, my mom had to come up to the school and she gave the vice principal a piece of her mind. And then from then on, she left me alone. But in unpacking things in counseling, I came to realize that because it was my sister and I that were in the situation where I was molested. And I figured as long as it was happening to me, it wasn't happening to her.
How old is your sister?
She was 5.
She was 5.
She was 5.
Was this someone that was supposed to be taking care of you?
This is someone that was associated with someone who was supposed to be taking care of me.
Okay.
And sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. And when he was there, he wasn't a good person.
I'm so sorry.
That's okay.
But you felt you were protecting your sister.
Yeah.
Yeah. And how did you get out of that situation?
We had to be moved from there because they were associated with our elementary school at the time.
Okay.
And so my parents found out that the math teacher that I had in previous years that was not a good teacher was going to be my math teacher for the next grade. So my mom was like, nope, gotta move, gotta go.
So this was like an after school care type of situation. Mm-hmm. So you moved schools.
Yeah, moved schools. And then the after school care didn't come into play anymore.
Okay.
So we were removed.
Did you ever tell your parents?
Oh, my dad doesn't know.
Mm.
But my mom does. Yeah.
I'm glad that worked out so you were able to get out of that situation. Do you have any advice for someone who has a similar thing but wasn't able to get out of it?
No matter how much this person that is hurting you is trying to convince you not to say anything, scream it. Tell everyone and everybody that you can get your hands on, anybody whose attention you can get, tell it. Tell it, tell it, tell it. Tell someone that you trust, tell an authority figure, tell it, because if you don't, it'll never stop.
Do you think there was any signs that if another adult in your life might have noticed?
Thinking back, to be honest, I don't know.
Because you just weren't. I
was so young.
Yeah. You probably didn't even understand.
I don't think so. I don't think so. But I knew it was wrong.
Yeah.
But outside of that, I don't think so.
So you did get out of that situation. You went to the new school, but you did encounter some issues with this girl. It's terrible. I think bullying it's something it's interesting that it continues to happen. It's interesting that we know it goes on. It's so common, but yet what do we do about it?
The one thing that we as human beings have gotten away from is just listening to one another, providing that space to be a shoulder for someone. Now, mind you, I understand how we've gotten there. Everyone on the planet is dealing with some sort of trauma in one way, shape, or form. And if you look around, look at the world, it's on fire. So, do people have the capacity to really make that space for others if they have their own traumas that are bubbling out of their pores and they don't know what to do with? They don't know how to process it.
It's so interesting. I was just going through an interview I had with a guy named Henry. And in that conversation that I had with him, he was talking about being bullied. And he said something that really struck me. He said that even though it was terrible and he was hurt, deeply hurt emotionally, he understood at some level that for the bully, that bully was obviously suffering and for whatever reason felt safe being mean to him. Mm-hmm. And so at some level, he had compassion. He said, I have to reframe it and think I was actually doing something for him that he needed in that moment. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was so selfless, such a selfless thing to say, instead of having anger toward him.
He's absolutely right, because that bully has gotten to that point because something is going on at home that is causing that child to act out.
Yeah.
So that child doesn't know how to deal with that other than the way that they're dealing with it. So he's absolutely right. And the best way to deal with trauma is to look at the entire situation of it. Yes, you are and I don't like to call trauma survivors victims. I just don't. So yes, you are the survivor in the situation, but you also, there is a silver lining to whatever it is that you're going through, no matter what it is. And that takes me to my own domestic abuse situation. I'm like, was it awful? Absolutely. Absolutely. And it caused the damage that it permeated my soul, to be honest. Yeah. But in unpacking what I had been through and going to counseling and developing myself spiritually, I came to understand that he clearly had some sort of trauma experience in his childhood, most likely, that was never dealt with, that just festered and grew and there was no justice, there was nothing. This is his way of being able to survive in the world. And I understood totally. Yeah. And to be honest, I can't hate him because through my experience with him, I have my son and I now have my relationship with God. Two of the most important things I will ever have in my life are as a result of that relationship.
Yeah. I always say that the worst experiences in my life, the people who I feel have been the worst to me, or the experiences that being in a relationship with them have caused, is just that shows me they're my greatest teacher. The worst people are your greatest teachers. The worst experiences are your greatest teachers. But I'm really struck by how when you're talking about this bullying incident, that immediately triggered you to go to your experience then in the future of being a victim of domestic violence. That's related. Interesting. So I want to get to that point. Let's just go back to school when you were in your teens and just go a little bit through that of life to see if there's anything else, any other patterns or themes that we can find. So after you were in your early teens, you experienced a little bit of trouble with someone at school. That was resolved once your mother got involved. You told her and she got involved, and then that resolved, which thankfully that happened. And then after that, when you got into high school, how was your experience then?
I was going through a lot. I was suicidal most of high school, to be honest.
Really? How did that happen?
There were some aspects to my childhood that I don't want to divulge quite yet.
Okay.
And that definitely led to the depression and the anxiety that I experienced in high school.
Okay.
But that didn't keep me from wanting to have a normal, like, teenage experience. So I was a cheerleader all 4 years, absolutely loved it. I took joy in certain subjects in school. I was fantastic at science and writing and reading. Math was horrible. I hated it. But
Me too.
there were certain aspects of being in high school that I really liked, but I stuck to myself mostly. I wasn't interested in being popular. I wasn't interested in dressing like anybody else. I wanted to be around good people and have good friends who were loving and just really nice people. I wanted to be in nice spaces. And those are the type of people that I gravitated toward. I didn't get in trouble in school. I skipped school a little bit my senior year, but I was really good at it. So my parents never found out. This was the first time they ever hear about that. We would go down the street to the movies, or I had a friend that lived a few blocks away. We would go hang out at her house and like work on cheerleading routines and watch movies. There was never any alcohol involved, never any experimentation with drugs or sex or anything like that. I was a really straight-laced kid, but I was dealing with a lot of inner turmoil, and the discipline of the martial arts really equipped me to be able to deal with that and not go off on the deep end. Man, martial arts, boy, it really gave me some good stuff.
It sounds like it.
Yeah.
It reminds me of how I feel about yoga, practicing yoga in the same way. It's got a spiritual aspect. It's a lot of work with the mind and also the physical fitness aspect of it too. Very interesting. Wow. So you had a rough inner life as an adolescent, and you had the martial arts to keep you from going off the deep end, as you said. And then what happened after high school? Did you go to another school? Did you go to college?
I went to college to study as a veterinarian.
Ooh.
And I wanted to study equine sports medicine. And I fell in love with horses long ago, but I also wanted to get into modeling. So I was torn between the two. But by the time I got there, my brain was just, it had no steam left. My brain was really tired. And I wasn't really retaining the information during lecture that I needed to. I was great when I was working in the field with the horses and with the veterinarians and doctors and whatnot. But when it came to sitting in class and really absorbing the material, I was having trouble. But at the time, I got recruited by a modeling group, and we were doing traveling modeling shows. And eventually I was cast in a couple of commercials, which was amazing. I had so much fun. And I was cast in a play as a female lead in the play. And I did all the rehearsals, all the blocking, but the acting bug had bitten me by then. And I had already decided to move to LA. So my understudy ended up doing the play. I think that summer I went back home and I told my parents that I was going to be moving to Los Angeles. And my dad didn't really say anything, but my mom was like, no. Up until that point, I had never told my parents no. I had never defied them. I had never stepped outside of the neat little box that they needed me to stay into.
Yeah.
And I said, I'm going. So I packed up 2 duffel bags and $400 and I moved to LA.
Wow. So you moved to LA with 2 duffel bags and $400 in your pocket.
Yes.
Okay. How did that work? What happened when you got there?
My dad had a long time martial arts associate out here named Eric Chen, and he was amazing. He and his family took me in. They had a gorgeous home in Huntington Beach, and they gave me their guest room. I remember this guest room. It had the most beautiful bathroom. It had a walk-in closet. It was amazing. And so I don't remember how long I stayed there, but I was there a while. And I helped. They had 2 beautiful little kids. I helped with the kids and whatnot. When I got here, I just pounded the pavement. I've always had an entrepreneurial spirit coursing through my veins. So I knew it was just part of me to just come out here and just get on it and stay on it immediately. I jumped into whatever I thought I should jump into. And everybody that I met, I took in the information and I processed it. And I kept building, I kept moving, I kept calling, I kept emailing, I kept showing up, I kept meeting people and going to showcases. And meeting acting coaches and doing extra work and doing whatever I needed to do in order to hone my craft and grow and meet new people. And I kept on that course and I just didn't stop.
What's striking me is that I think that you went from being suicidal just a few years earlier, and now you had this like real exuberance about you, really trying to push and make your way in this world that really fed you and gave you like life.
Yeah.
So how was your state of mind? Were you feeling better about yourself in your inside world?
Yes. Something about being in this place is something about, I found my place in California. I really did. It's, the air is, the sun, it rejuvenates you. The seawater, it rejuvenates you. And in the space of Los Angeles and Hollywood is the place for creativity. And I never realized how much of a creator I am until I got into this place and how bright that light was. And I always knew that there was greatness in me, as we all have.
Yeah.
I just never really knew what that greatness was and how great it was. So being here allowed me to cultivate that. And I didn't know what I was doing. I was just coming out here to act. I didn't know that was what I was born with to do.
Yeah. So this was like a real turning point in your life.
Yes, I discovered the person that I knew was there, but didn't really know what she looked like, walk, talk like. I was discovering my greatest self.
It feels like you were doing something that you wanted to do, whereas your whole life before that, you'd been doing maybe what your family did.
I was living for others, yeah. And it still is. It's been a long road and it's been a really hard one. Entertainment is, as far as I can tell, the most competitive and difficult industry that there is on the planet, for good reason. And boy, if I tell people that are interested, I'm like, if it's not in you, if you're not born to do it, find something else to do.
Do you have anything that happened to you when you first started out that you could share, like a story for people?
When I first started out, it's all a blur, to be honest with you. It's gone so fast. It's like I never stopped.
Have you had an experience with a rejection when something you tried out for? And
all the time.
How do you deal with that?
Time. And that's where the martial arts comes back in.
Okay.
So when you go into an audition, you're going to walk in that room and see people who look just like you, lined all the way up this wall and lined all the way down that wall to read for the same role. You have got to have a strong sense of self in order to not let that bother you. You've got to go into that room knowing that this role is yours. And if you don't end up getting it, it wasn't meant for you. And it's a learning process. Okay, why didn't I get that? And what can I improve for the next go round? Because I'm getting the next one. And you have to do that over and over and over. You have to be borderline crazy to keep getting up from all of the rejection. It can really weigh on you, especially being female, because we are so judged on every inch that we have, of whatever it is, what you look like, how tall you are, how old you are, and the fact that we have a shorter shelf life. It can really get to women.
Yeah. And they're not shy about telling you exactly what's wrong with you, are they? They'll say you're too tall or you're too heavy or things that maybe aren't politically correct. You'll hear every day.
It depends on what region you're in. Like in New York City, they're totally like that.
They're blunt.
Okay, you're too big. Sorry, bye. Whereas in LA, they'll be like, oh, you're not really what we're looking for.
Okay.
Thank you. But the grin on their face is totally fake, and it's something other than that.
Yeah.
So it really helps to be personally aware and have that anchor and be working on you, not just as an actor, but be working on you as a person so that you can withstand all of that.
Yeah. You have great confidence. And I guess that comes from the martial arts thing.
100%.
So did you continue practicing martial arts when you got to California?
Yes, I did. I did. My dad has quite a few associates out here, and I tried to keep alive, but the acting eventually really took over. That I was so fed by developing my light, and I had been doing martial arts almost every day since like diapers. So
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, it's time for me to.
So you're ready to take a break.
I was ready to take a break, and yes.
And what was the reaction from your parents when you started to blossom in your own right?
I think that my dad was quietly pleased because, for instance, okay, so I came this close to being cast on the show Survivor.
Oh,
This close. And I think it was between me and one other girl or something like that. And he was so happy. And I wasn't supposed to tell them because you're supposed to keep tight lips. And I wanted to tell my parents because I wanted them to be proud of me. And my dad was telling everybody in Maryland, I'm like, oh, no, you can't say anything. Every so often, I would get really close to a big break. And my dad was just so excited. And recently, he just told me something that was really touching. He said, whatever you believe in, I believe in.
Aw.
And that was really touching because I've come to understand that I have a lot in common with my father. The things that he's done throughout his career in martial arts. He's done martial arts films, he's done radio shows, he's had a TV show all about martial arts and more and more. And I have done basically all of that. Not really being aware
of the parallels.
And I'm like, really? Wow. And now I'm getting into action films and whatnot. And our careers are coming together. Mm-hmm. We're talking about doing projects together and possibly doing a TV show together and bringing in some of his contacts that want to get back into film and television. And it's wonderful working with my dad because he has so much knowledge and so much experience, and he's the greatest storyteller on the planet. And
wow.
I could just sit and listen to him for hours. And he's told these stories a million times. I've heard them a million times, but for some reason, it seems like I'm hearing them again. And given how my brain works, it's like in living color. I can see all of his stories as if they're movies in my head. And I'm like, I can only imagine what it was like to live through your experiences. And I think that he sees the parallels now as well. Mm-hmm. When I'm describing some of the things that I am writing now and I'm getting involved with. And it's just, it feels really good to have those parallels with my dad.
Yeah. That's a strong connection to have, especially between a girl and her father. I think that's a very important relationship. It says a lot about you. And also, I'm wondering about how your current relationship with your dad being so strong. Mm-hmm. And I know that you do have a domestic violence kind of situation in your story. I'm feeling like we should talk about that now because I'm wondering how that sort of ties in. So you came to LA in your 20s. You were grinding it out in the entertainment industry through your 20s. Did you have anything that happened, like major successes at that time? Were you in any shows that we would know?
I did a couple of smaller independent films.
Okay.
I did a show, a typical reality show where you line up outside and they give you some sides and you go in and you sit in front of judges and you do the scene. The audition was wonderful. I had a great time doing this audition. And normally I'm really nervous in auditions, but they gave me the sides, but yet they wanted to see if I could improvise. So I was sitting there between two other people and they gave us this scenario where we were in the gynecologist's office and I just found out that the gynecologist just told me that myself and my husband, we were pregnant.
Oh.
Who this person was over here. So this person really didn't fit, but immediate emotion.
Oh.
Immediate. It was just like, I was like shaking and crying and happy and freaking out. And they were like, okay, cut. So, needless to say, I was chosen for the show.
Oh, that's great.
I had a fantastic time. One of the producers on the show actually was a producer for America's Next Top Model as well.
Okay.
So when I was voted off the show, she came backstage and she said, "You do know that had they not already chosen who was going to win the show, so they knew who was going to win.
They know.
But they said if it was based on talent and merit, you would have won."
Wow.
Okay, that sucks, but thanks for
Yeah.
telling me.
Wow. That's really interesting. Do you think that's true for all reality shows, or some of them at least?
Some of them.
I guess we don't know for sure, but
It super sucks. But
yeah. Oh my gosh.
She did tell me though, she said, "I'm going to check with the producers about the storyline for the next season of America's Next Top Model, because I think that look-wise, you'd be great for it, but they tend to want Black women to be the quintessential type Black women on a reality show where you're cursing people out and causing fights and stuff like that." And
like drama. They were looking for someone to be their drama person.
Yeah, their drama. I'm like, yeah, I'm talking about that. But she was like, let me check. And so she gave me a call a couple weeks later. She was like, yeah, but I want you to come out and audition anyway. So I went out and auditioned and nothing ever came of it. But it was a wonderful experience. I was really proud of myself.
I love it. So you had some great experiences, and that must have kept you going throughout your 20s. And then at some point you met someone. Okay. Do you want to talk about that?
Okay. So I met him at an entertainment industry Christmas party.
And how old were you?
Oh gosh, how old was I? 27.
Okay.
27.
Okay.
And
late 20s.
And met him, and we immediately clicked. And we just started dating, and it was wonderful. I didn't have any weird energy or nothing like that. So I'm not the type of person to just jump in with someone. I've never been that way. So we met in mid-December and got married on Valentine's Day the next year.
Oh my goodness. So you were only dating for 3 months?
Yeah. And found out later that I was 9 days pregnant when we got married. I didn't.
Okay.
Yeah. Things were great. Things were fine up until, and I didn't realize that it had started happening at this point until I started unpacking and counseling.
Okay.
But about 7 months pregnant is when things started to happen.
Okay.
Like, for instance, I'm 7 months pregnant and I'm being forced to bend over the tub and clean the tub, or clean out clothes in a pot on the floor in the middle of the living room.
So what do you mean? He would set up the scenario and make you do this?
Yeah.
Out of nowhere, he started doing that?
Yeah, out of nowhere. It didn't make any sense.
No.
So then I had my son, and then I was, of course, over the moon because I wanted a boy. Wonderful. And so soon after that, I started trying on my skinny girl clothes, like the clothes that you put in the back of the closet and you want to fit into again. So I started trying on my clothes again and looking in the mirror. I was like, okay, all right. Don't have too much work to do. And he said, you're still going to have to get some work done because you can't fit in those clothes quite well yet.
So did he want you to be in some sort of like domestic role? Like he was asking you to do these cleaning tasks that are out of the ordinary?
Yeah.
But then also wanted you to fit like the June Cleaver, looking great and also doing all the household work and that kind of thing? Was it that?
Yes, which didn't make any sense to me because when we met, I was very clear about where I had come from, what I was doing, and what I was going to be doing. So that was not ever going to change. I was absolutely clear about who I was and what my life was going to look like. So being married was not going to change that course.
Yeah. You wanted to continue to pursue your acting career.
And he was absolutely supportive of that, 100% supportive of it. In fact, he was like, I'm going to be getting such and such amounts of money because he played basketball overseas. And so apparently this turned out not to be true, but he had $3 million overseas in somewhere in something, doing something. And I'm going to withdraw that and put that into your production company.
Oh,
I had planned on starting a production company and I was over the moon. I was like, are you serious?
so he told you he had all this money that wasn't true.
That turned out not to be true.
Okay. He had this idea that of this role he wanted you to take, but you had been clear from the beginning about who you were.
And he never voiced that. He never voiced that he wanted a stay-at-home wife. He never.
Until you had the child.
Yeah,
until you were pregnant.
Yeah. So then things started to unravel and change. And he expected dinner when he got home. He expected all of the clothes to be washed and clean. He expected me to do nothing but stay at home and take care of our son. So what I was put on the planet to do isn't just going to die. It wasn't ever just going to go away. And I'm not that type of person to stop my plan either. And I was very honest. And I thought that he was very honest about who he was and what he wanted. But it turns out he was a completely different person.
Wow.
It was very...
So aside from the things he wanted you to do and who he wanted you to be in your role as a wife and a mother, was there other abuse that was taking place?
Yes. So this part, I guess my brain put into another portion where I wasn't going to see it. Yeah. But in counseling, I realized that I had experienced marital rape.
Oh.
And it wasn't... Okay, so once my son and I left him, and wonderful people took us in over a certain amount of time, and a good friend of mine took us in, and one night he was out doing something, but he came home and he was in the kitchen talking as he normally does, but I was sitting in the living room watching a movie, and my back was to the kitchen. And so when I didn't respond to what he was saying, he walked out of the kitchen around in to face me, and I was totally just not there. I was somewhere else. And so he sat down and put his arm around me and looked at what I was watching. So I was watching a film where this young lady had been gang raped and murdered. And the process of the film, at this point in the film, an officer was trying to put the pieces together, and it was a reenactment of what had happened to her. And I was just frozen. And he said to me, "You don't have to watch this." And I said, I have to. I went through that with my counselor, and I was like, why did I need to see that? And she said that it was probably because you needed to see that there was going to be justice for her. And then my friend said to me, he asked me, were you, because he knew what happened, of course. He had to know what happened because we were there living with him at this point. Okay. So he said, were you raped or anything like that? And I said, not that I remember. And then something clicked. And then I described to him a scenario, and he said, sounds like rape to me. Yeah. And so I discussed that not only in my personal counseling, but in group counseling. And the counselor got up and walked over to me and said, you experienced marital rape. Yeah. And it didn't happen in a way where people think rape happens. Yeah. Clothes weren't torn. I wasn't dragged by my ankles. It was a scenario where I was held down by his weight and I couldn't move. And another scenario where I really don't want to talk about that one, but it happened a couple times, and I know that I didn't want it, and it made me physically sick. Yeah. So he thought just because you're his wife, yes, you're going to fill these roles. You're going to clean, you're going to cook, you're going to have dinner, you're going to take care of our child, and I can have sex with you whenever I want, even if you don't want to. Yes. Yeah, I think that's so important for people to hear, that just because you're married doesn't mean that you can't be raped as a woman. Yeah. Sorry. That's not a part of the law of rape yet. Okay. I was working with the LA County Domestic Violence Council, and there were two lawyers I was working with two lawyers that are trying to get marital rape to be prosecutable by law. And you wouldn't believe how difficult it is just to have those two words put into the existing law and the fight back that is occurring to keep that. I'm just like, what type of world do we live in where I don't get it.
Yeah, that is such a difficult situation. I'm really sorry you had to go through that. When you decided that you were going to take your son and leave, do you remember what was the catalyst for that?
Yes, I had a counselor at the time. And we also, between myself and my son's father, we had a mutual friend who was in entertainment, but she was also a licensed marriage and family counselor. And she had known him for a long time before she met me.
Okay.
And so she and I would talk multiple times a week because she knew how he was.
Okay.
And so she knew how things had been progressing through our marriage. And eventually she said to me, and I think this was just a week after my other counselor said the same thing. She said, so you know how he is now.
Yeah.
You have to make a decision. You know that the likelihood of him getting better or stopping it's not going to happen. So he's going to get worse as he gets older, and he's already getting older.
Yeah.
So you have to make a decision. Are you going to stay understanding that this is going to get worse or not?
Yeah.
And just a week prior, my counselor told me, and she had actually met him. She said, you have to leave. She said, I'm not supposed to tell clients this. I'm supposed to go over all of the options. And she said, I care about you. You are a friend now.
Yeah.
You have to leave.
Yeah.
And during that time as well, I was on fire for God. Like I wanted to know everything about God. I wanted to get as close as I could to him. So all of those things coming together and understanding the responsibility I had to my son. My son was the gift to me to take care of. He is not mine. He is God's. God gave him to me to take care of. So it's my responsibility to make sure that he is healthy, mind, body, and spirit.
Yeah.
So I had a choice. Either I choose to take care of the one that needs at least one healthy person to take care of them and show them how to live their lives in a healthy way, or I can stay with someone who knows better.
Yeah.
So a light switch went off.
Yeah.
And at that point, I'm like, nope, we're leaving. And I instantly started to look for resources like housing and counseling, work, because at that point, I wasn't able to work either.
So he didn't want you to work. Was he like verbally abusive to you too?
Oh, yes, very.
What kind of things would he say?
So there's spiritual abuse, financial abuse, emotional, psychological, mental, physical, sexual, all of those. Yeah. One instance where I remember I was standing in the kitchen washing dishes, and the kitchen looked into the living room. And just out of the blue, he said, whoever it is that molested you really fucked you in the head. Out of the blue, there's no conversation, no nothing. And at this point, like he had said stuff like that before already. And so I was numb, but I stood there and I just looked at him. And I said, do you hear yourself when you say things like that? What do you think? How does that sound to you when it comes out of your mouth when you say that to another human being? Because is that hurtful? Yes. But I have to wonder what goes through your mind when you say something that horrible to someone else. That trauma was horrible. But yet for you to turn it around and use it as a dagger and hurt someone.
Yeah, there's something wrong with you now as a, like he's psychologically abusing you.
Yes. And that would happen all the time. There was one time, I think it was my son's, how old was he? I don't remember, but I think it maybe 2 years old. And we were going to plan a party. And his dad didn't want to have any involvement with planning the party. So I was like, are you sure? Yeah, go ahead and do it. So along the way, I was asking him for his input, didn't want to be involved. So there's a kids aquarium in San Pedro. And I thought that would be nice. That would be something that we could go to, and then he has 3 other daughters. So I was like, they can come. It would be really nice for my son if everybody was there. Mm-hmm. So planned it and got the tickets and everything and invited everyone. And so we're in the car and he's on the phone with his daughters that are on their way down. And he was just out loud trash talking the entire party, trash talking where we're going. This is so stupid. I don't see why we're doing this, blah, 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 blah. And he was just going on and on. And I said, you had ample opportunity to be involved. If there was something else that you wanted to do, why didn't you say anything? He would just do certain things and say certain things that would just stick a little knife in and would just turn, knowing that he had that power because I loved him. It's like they take the love that they know that you have for them and use it as a weapon. And it's not natural human instinct. That's not what love is.
No.
So we're all wired to have love in a healthy way. So when someone who grooms you in one way to love you and then ever so slightly pulls back the onion layers and rewires your brain.
Yeah. It's manipulation.
Toxic, manipulation. Yeah. And you don't realize what's going on because you're so clouded because you love that person and you have this natural love that's within you and you're too busy trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, they make you feel like you're crazy in a way.
Yes, it's crazy making. Yeah, crazy making.
Yeah. Did you ever find out if he was someone who's be classified as a narcissist?
I am absolutely sure he is. Okay. Absolutely sure, because in my process of healing, we go back to that. I also now am licensed through the state of California as a domestic violence victims advocate.
Oh,
and in that training, you learn about violence in all forms. You also learn about psychological issues and whatnot. And also in college, I studied very heavily like psychology. So I had some foundation there. And I'm a natural researcher. So once I figured out what was going on, I dug into all subjects. And so I started to put the pieces together. Yeah. And I'm like, yep, definitely. Now I'm not sure, because there's like a triad. They call it the dark triad. So it's narcissistic personality disorder and psychopath and also sociopath. I'm not sure which one he is because they all bleed over.
Okay.
But he's one of them.
Or one or more.
One or more.
Interesting. And I'm curious about the whirlwind kind of romance you had before you got married. Do you think he was trying to love bomb you and get you into the marriage?
Absolutely. Yes. I had a very lengthy conversation with his previous wife.
Okay. That was my next question.
Yes. Yeah. They were together 16 years. Okay. How she managed that, I would have lost my mind. But what she experienced is basically the same thing that I experienced.
Okay.
And it just stretched out more over time.
Yeah.
And it was the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And I also had a dear friend in my life at the time, and she was like a mother figure. And she was in an abusive marriage for 30 years.
Oh,
and
gosh.
Her husband didn't become, that switch didn't happen until maybe 10 or 15 years in. It was weird.
That is weird.
But she could see the red flags. She could see the signs, and I couldn't. Mm-hmm. She didn't want to scare me. So there would be times where she would come over to our apartment, and I didn't have a car. I couldn't go anywhere. She would come over.
Yeah,
so she would
that's a sign.
Goodness. She would take us to the doctor, to the dentist, to the grocery store, and stuff like that. It was a really nice outlet. But there were times when she would come in and she would ask me very particular questions. And I didn't put it together until I got to a place where she could really explain. She was tiptoeing around it to make sure not to scare me.
Yeah.
And what she experienced was basically the same thing I had.
Wow. You eventually did get the courage up to leave. What was his reaction? Like, how did you do it? What was that? He was super mad.
Super upset. Nobody leaves him. How dare you? Nobody leaves him. I was the only one to actually make the step first. So I had to find a way to get to a courthouse. So my plan was to file a restraining order and file divorce papers at the same time. But the kicker was I had to do it while he was at work so he wouldn't find out.
Did he know that you were in counseling?
Yes, he did.
Okay. He wasn't going with you, I assume.
No, I tried to do marital. I tried to do it, but it wasn't working. He would sit in the counseling room and just go through his phone.
Oh.
He wouldn't engage. Like she'd be talking to him and he wouldn't put at the wall.
Yeah.
So he wouldn't do it. And I kept going.
Your plan was to get a restraining order and file the divorce papers.
All at the same time. So he served at the same time.
Yep.
But I wasn't able, it took too long. I had to go to the self-help center of the courthouse to get it done. And there are so many people waiting there for help. It was impossible for me to get it all done in one day. And so I had to make a choice, do one or the other. So I felt it was most important to do the restraining order first. So I got through the restraining order and noticed what time it was. Now, the self-help center was still open, but I had to make sure to make it back before he knew I was gone.
How did you get there?
I had someone drop me off.
Okay.
So I did the restraining order. I set it up to have an officer serve him. And the plan was to come back the next day, but I just wasn't able to. Once he got the restraining order, they served him at work.
Oh.
Yeah. So then he had to stay 100 feet away from me, our son, the apartment, church, and his school. Or not 100 feet, 100 yards. Yeah, okay. I think it was 100 yards.
Yeah.
And so then he had to come by the house and get some stuff. So there was a police officer that normally does this type of thing. So the police officer came to the apartment and stood in the living room while he packed up some stuff. And you should have seen like things that belonged to me or things that belonged to William. He would take them and throw them across the room just to be
my gosh.
And I was so happy that he was leaving.
Wow.
There wasn't a tear. I was not upset one bit. I didn't care how upset he was. I was so glad he was leaving. And he had a friend of his there because he was going to stay with the friend. And then he got stuff and he left. And I wanted to keep that apartment, but I couldn't afford it. I had no savings.
Yeah.
And
so he had been manipulating you financially as well. You didn't have any money of your own.
No, I didn't. But I tried. Like there was a family that we went to church with and they had 2 young children. And just to make some money to be able to just go grocery shopping, I would babysit for her. And we could take the bus. And William loved riding the bus. My son loved riding the bus. So I hated it, but he loved it. So I was like, okay, this is not horrible. Yeah. But then I was making $65 a week. That's not going to pay for groceries for 3 people.
No.
So if we needed more, he wouldn't give me his card. He had to go to the store with us and he had to run the card because his excuse was, I don't trust you with this card. I don't trust you to do this. I don't trust you to do that. And it was just control.
Wow. Yeah.
Control.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's heavy control. So you didn't keep the apartment. You and your son had to move to a different apartment at this time?
I met a gentleman at the WIC office.
Okay.
And he was a single parent and he had a ton of little children. And so he needed some help. And so I agreed to nanny for him. That is one thing I said I would never do because I am not about other people's children, to be honest with you. But he was a wonderful man. He was a very nice person and he needed help. I had started doing a little bit of nannying for him. And when he found out what was happening, he said, you come here and stay with us until you can find something else. And I had already been placing phone calls in shelters and transitional housing and friends and whatever. And so we moved into there and I had placed a phone call to the San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission in Reseda, California. And they didn't have any space, but they put us on the list. And one day they finally called and they had beds for us. Okay. So we moved out of there and we went to stay at the rescue mission, which I know when people think of rescue missions or shelters, they think they're this dark, scary, gross places. This was not that at all. It was a beautiful home that had been expanded, like huge. It was very large, and it had a very homey feel. They had a 30-day shelter on this side, temporary, and then they had individual rooms for families that needed to stay a bit longer. And so we were in the 30-day shelter, and then we eventually moved to our own room. And there were so many resources there. They had a shuttle to our church. At this point, I had a car, but I figured out how to get a car. I worked, that's another thing. I took the opportunity to work on my credit. And I got my credit up to the point where I could buy a car and drive off the lot without putting anything down. So I had
great.
At this point. And they had the shuttle to church. They had job resources. They had any type of resource that you could think of, they had. And this is where Pepperdine University, a representative from Pepperdine University came and gave a talk. They had a small program called the Micro Enterprise Business Program. And they took in people such as myself during that process in your life that had really good entrepreneurial business ideas. And they taught you the entrepreneurial business skills in order to start that business. So there were 27 of us in that program. It was like a 15-week program. It was their master's program condensed down into 15 weeks. So it was mind-blowingly intense. And there were 27 of us, 11 of us graduated, and I was the top in the class.
Wow.
I was one of only 2 that had their businesses funded. And Pepperdine actually funded my startup.
So how old are you at this point?
I'm 29. I think
so you're 29. Okay.
He was 2 when
Okay. So in the 2 years that you were with him, your life was totally decimated. You went from being this young woman who was so vibrant and getting all these jobs and starting your career in acting and getting roles to having nothing, having no money, no car, no livelihood, and just being totally under the control of your husband at the time.
Yeah.
So when you got yourself together and you had this help, which is amazing, and you got money for a startup, what did you start?
Okay, so I started an online children's clothing interface store type thing. Oh. And so you have the 15-week program. And if you have the chops, basically, they take you into an incubator. And I'd say maybe halfway through the incubator, the funding fell through in the program. And this is a 5-year-old program. I'm like, why is this happening this year? Are you serious? So the funding fell through in the program. So I couldn't finish the business. But I always knew that at some point I was going to continue that business because I think that my son would really enjoy starting his own clothing line and having that to focus on. So eventually I'm going to keep going. But yeah, that's what happened with that.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. So that fell through. So then what did you do?
So I got back into acting and writing, like really jumping into that. But now I had this that I had to figure out. So we were able to stay at the San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission for 5 months. And the goal towards the end of these programs is to have someone have housing and have employment. Yeah. And I started Uber already. So I was one of the few families, I was one of the few tenants that they allowed to work and have the phone and keep my son at the school that he was in, because normally they need you. They feel it's safer for you to cut all ties, everything that you had when you were in that relationship. Yeah. I said, look, I've already got this established, this and this, and I've already done all this work. All we need is somewhere to stay so that I can figure that aspect out. Yeah. And so that's what they allowed us to do. Wow. Yeah.
So you started driving for Uber.
California is expensive, really.
Yes.
Really.
Yes.
And trying to find a place to live, I still couldn't afford a place to live that wasn't either in a dangerous area really that wasn't in a dangerous area. And with the trauma that I had experienced already, I couldn't handle living in an area that wasn't going to be safe. And being a parent, I couldn't live in an area that wasn't going to be safe. So I went on the hunt for an affordable housing unit, an affordable housing apartment. And with my son going to school in Venice, I wanted to try to get as close to that area as possible because he had been going to school there since he was 18 months. So it really was our community. Like he had grown up with those kids and those families, and we were intermingling with these families and this community. So it took me 4 years to get an apartment. Wow. Wonderful people took us in for 4 years. We moved like 11 or 18 times. It was nuts.
But you were able to stay in that same area in Venice.
Yes, with his school. Oh, thank goodness. Yeah. He was in an incredible school, incredible, that it gave my son the anchor that he needed to continue to blossom as himself. And I could not have done what I had done during those years without them. The director of the school just recently passed away a couple of months ago, and her staff was so incredibly supportive of us. We were the only family that was on a payment plan. Everybody else paid. It was an expensive school. Yeah. We were the only ones that were on a payment plan. And she was basically like, you pay when you can. You pay what you can when you can. And they just loved my son. And they took us in, and they were the family that we needed, the support we needed. And we gave back in return. And oh, goodness. It
sounds like you had so much positive help. How did you find these situations too? Because I know there's so many people who have trouble finding help. How did you find it? And what's your advice about finding help?
I really just pounded the pavement. I just looked. I went online, and anything that popped into my brain that sounded like it would make sense for my situation, I typed it in Google and I looked it up, and I kept looking and I kept looking, and I wrote everything down. And I made so many phone calls, and I bugged the crap out of people, and I emailed, but I was always pleasant. What I find is that, like with certain organizations, like with the Department of Public Social Services, they're inundated with people that need help. And I find that a lot of people who need help go there and they complain about the disposition of the people that work there. I don't have one experience with a nasty person that works, not one. I think it has a lot to do with the energy that you bring in with people. They have to deal with other people's traumas day in and day out every day. So it's rough being in the pit with people who are going through crises all the time. It's going to affect you if you can't get out of that. Of course, it's going to come out. It shouldn't, but it is. I think a lot of what I've experienced is because I came to the table humbled.
And also you came with the mentality of a survivor. You said earlier, instead of a victim, you came in as a survivor.
Yeah.
And so you were looking for, what services do you have that you could give me so I can help myself get out of this situation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's exactly what it was. Getting myself out. Going back to the martial arts, it gave me the pick yourself up by the bootstraps.
Yeah.
Grit.
Personal responsibility. There are things that happen to us that we don't have any control over, but we do have control over our response. And there are people in life who have it easier and people who have it really hard, but there is opportunity for everyone. It's interesting to think of it that way. So you were able to get back on your feet. And so what happened after you went through a series of other households that helped you out? Were you able to get an apartment? So 4 years, you said it took you?
Yes. During the tail end of the portion of the pandemic where everybody was having to be sequestered in their own spaces. Yeah. During those 4 years, I was getting on all sorts of lists and making all sorts of phone calls for affordable housing units. And I showed up at these buildings at 6 a.m. in the morning on New Year's Day, and I was very determined. Yeah. The pandemic created a perfect storm, I think. Unfortunate, but perfect. With COVID, as we all know, a lot of people passed away. Yeah. And a lot of older people, unfortunately, passed away, meaning a lot of older people that had affordable housing units passed away, and that left a lot of vacancies. Whereas you can be on a list for years to try to get an affordable housing unit, and forget it, you just never get one. But the pandemic caused like I said, an unfortunate perfect storm.
Yeah.
And we got an email from the building we're in now, and also another building that's under the same umbrella, under the same property management. And one was 1 bedroom, and the one that we're in was a 2 bedroom. And believe it or not, this one was $100 cheaper than the 1 bedroom. And I said, I have a very rambunctious boy in all the room that we can get. So I was crossing my fingers and praying, because it's a 2-tiered process to be evaluated for it. If you're approved by the building, you still have to be approved by the city.
Oh.
So I was approved by the building, and they said, we just now have to get the approval from the city. I'm like, oh, please.
Wow.
And one day I got the email that we got it, and I didn't tell my son.
Oh.
And I came to the leasing office, and I picked up the lease agreement and the keys. And because this was still during the pandemic, I had to come over by myself. The leasing agent wasn't going to walk me through. So I remember walking over here and just standing outside the door and staring at the door for a good minute. And so I walked in, and I closed the door behind me. And of course, there's nothing in here. No sound, there's nothing in here. And I don't know how long I stood there in the silence. I couldn't move. Like, to have our own space.
Yeah.
And for my son to have his own room.
Oh.
It was, and still is. And it's safety.
Yeah.
And it's security, yes, but it's safety. And just to see him, his room is a mess. It's always a mess, but it's his. He has all his toys, all his possessions, all the things that he loves in his own space. And for people who have not had their own space, you just don't know how much of a treasure it is once you finally do have your own space to go and have your own thoughts. And oh my gosh, but I remember walking through the apartment, and I walked into the bathroom, and there's a washer and dryer in the bathroom. I'm screaming. I think I found a bucket of gold. There's a washer and dryer in here. I was like, oh my gosh. So we have now our own space, and the next move is to our dream house, which is on my vision board, which is in my hallway.
I love it. I love it. How old was your son when he got into that apartment? 5, and he's 8 now. So 3 years.
Yeah. So
that's amazing. And you said that you have started up a nonprofit. Is that right? So can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. It is called EYONDV. It's spelled EYEONDV. So, and it's an acronym for Eyes on Domestic Violence.
Okay.
So it is the movement to eradicate domestic violence.
Yeah.
And I started it during that time when everybody was sequestered in their own homes. I knew that was the time for me to do it. So I knew that I needed to build a website. I needed to build my social media. I needed to start having interviews. And I was so nervous doing those interviews that I could feel my heart beating in my ears. And I was sweating. I have this one armpit over here that sweats when I'm nervous. this one over here, it gets nervous more than the left one. But I said to myself, I know this is something that I have to overcome. Part of my training as an actress taught me to use whatever energy that I'm experiencing, take that as pure energy and give it to my character, and she uses it whatever way that she needs. I never knew that training was going to apply in my real life.
So that's why you had to go through that journey as an actress.
Yep. That's why I had to go.
Isn't that amazing how life does that for us?
It does. It all ties in.
It does.
There are no coincidences.
No. What does your nonprofit do?
What we do is interview anyone who has anything to do with domestic violence, domestic abuse, interpersonal violence so that we can cast a giant spotlight on all things that have to do with those subjects, from the womb to however far it goes. And so that people understand that it isn't one instance. There are red flags. There is a seed planted in the womb. There is a seed planted in childhood that causes an individual to either have a tendency towards victimhood or survivorship, or have a tendency towards predatory behavior.
Yeah. And it's got to be like a perfect match between those two people.
Yes.
Very interesting. And what kind of patterns did you see then in your own life once you started to really explore this issue?
I started to see the red flags in my son's father's behavior. That's where I started to understand that he is the way that he is because of what he more than likely experienced as a child, and understanding how and having interactions with his family, I started to understand how that could have happened. There's a term called flying monkeys.
Yeah. Funny. It's the second time this has come up for me today.
Really?
Yeah. I was talking about it earlier.
So they're a real thing.
Yes.
And I noticed that he has flying monkeys around him, and they've always been there. Yep. And I'm like, okay, so now I understand why this has continued to happen
so great.
Decade after decade, and several marriages and several children. It's going to keep happening because he has the support for it to keep happening.
He has the support, and those flying monkeys will always be against you or the person that's in his life. Yes.
And it's because they deep down know two things. One, they had a hand in creating this person. So if it ever comes out that he is who he is, people are going to start asking questions about, you knew this, didn't you? Why didn't you do anything about it? Why didn't you stop it? And now the spotlight is on them.
Yeah.
And also to have the links between all of these people who are in this scenario, because if one person does something, that they know that they have all of these people to have their back.
Yeah. And flying monkeys are usually very insecure. And then the person who's the narcissist, like your ex, usually is charismatic in some way. Did you find that he was like that?
He's very charismatic, very attractive, dressed very well, very flashy, cared very much about what he looked like, what he drove, how he dressed, enjoyed had to be the center of attention.
Had to be the center of attention.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yes. Oh my gosh. Wow. Sounds familiar. If we think about it, probably many of us have experienced someone like this in our lives. And
very narcissism, and to the psychological level, it's very common. But the older they get, the better they get at being able to hide it.
And it can take a while to figure it out.
Yeah, it takes a while to figure it out because it isn't a light switch for them. It isn't say, okay, I find this person attractive, so I'm going to turn this light switch on so I can manipulate her. No, this is how these people are wired. This is how they are. So there isn't a switch there. This is just, they're doing this with everybody. Yeah. But it manifests slightly differently with everyone because everyone has different circumstances.
Yeah.
On everything that you tell someone in a relationship that you're telling them in order to get to know them and to get to know you, they're taking all this information and cataloging it so that they have all this information to draw you in. Yeah. And then maybe to use against you, which is what they do. To use against you because they know they're going to need it. And that's what he was doing when he came at you with your past trauma. That's exactly what he was doing. Yeah. Yeah. It's so crazy. Two things I want to ask you, but the first is what was going on with your parents at this time when you were in this relationship and then struggling afterwards to get back on your feet? My dad, he was surprised. At this point, we lived in the San Fernando Valley Rescue Mission, and I was still nannying for that first family a little bit. And I don't remember how he found out, if I told him or what, but he found out what was going on. And needless to say, I didn't make it upstairs to go to work. He kept me on the phone for hours. He dominated that conversation. He was so supportive and caring and asked questions. And he was just talking and talking. And I was flabbergasted. And he was very supportive. He really listened,
Mm.
really listened. My parents still live in Maryland, and here I am in
Okay.
California. And the court process was absolute hell, absolute hell. And I'd say 95% of it, I was alone. And it was extraordinarily traumatizing.
What strikes me is that you got into this bad marriage very quickly. You had your child very quickly, and then you were stuck there for a couple of years before you realized that it was toxic and you had to get out. And then that was like a relatively short time. So like over the period of about 2 years. And then it took you so long to recover from that. That strikes me, that it took you another 3-4 years to recover and get back on your feet.
Recovery is, I still haven't completely recovered.
Yeah. I guess what I mean is to get back into an apartment, to be able to live your everyday life independently.
Yeah.
That's what I mean by recovery. But yes, I don't mean to belittle that at all.
No.
That'll be a lifetime process.
It is a lifetime process. And I think people don't really understand that. You have to be willing to go through that process to fight for yourself, because that's the most important, especially if you have children.
Yeah.
You have to be your best self in order to allow for that child to go on and be his or her best self.
Yeah. And so I know that you said you were really an advocate for religion and your relationship with God. Can you talk about that a bit and how that's helped you?
That is like my favorite subject. Okay. So how it started, interestingly enough, when I was with my son's father, we were on the hunt for a church home, and we had visited a few, and an associate of his told him about the church at Rocky Peak. And when we went, I'm getting goosebumps right now just talking about it. We went and I immediately fell in love with the place. I felt God's presence there, and it's a huge campus, huge church. And God's presence is undeniably there in the trees, in the donuts that they serve, in this sanctuary. It's absolutely wonderful place. I wanted to get baptized immediately. I wanted to be in Bible study. I wanted to do all of it. And I was gobbling up everything that I could learn about God that I possibly could. And that was another way that he was trying to control. Didn't want me to going to Bible study, didn't want us going by ourselves, didn't want me talking to the ladies in my Bible study, because there were 2 other domestic violence survivors that were in my Bible study group. So he wasn't happy about that. But ever since then, I was chasing after God and learning. And it was giving me a perspective that he could not control.
Yeah.
One of the tactics of narcissists, especially an abuser, is to cut you off from any opposing opinion, any help, any belief, anything. And if someone is hungry for God, if someone is hungry for that spirituality, that comes from within. So that wasn't going to be dampened no matter what he did. So ever since then, I've been growing and growing in my relationship, my individual relationship with God. Eventually, I outgrew religion. Religion is more about something that is man-made, to be honest.
Yeah.
And whereas spirituality can live within that, because spirituality is the individual relationship that I have with God, that you might have with God. It's that relationship. And I came to understand that was the heart of it. So I have grown so much in my spirituality and come to understand frequencies and energy and alignment. And I work on my alignment every day, all day. I fall asleep to a particular video every night about my alignment. Staying in alignment has manifested things in my life, especially December of last year and this month, that do not make sense if you don't attribute it to God's spirituality and alignment. They don't make sense at all. So through my relationship with God, I have come to understand what all of these occurrences in my life mean and how they tie together. And it's interesting because I had to unpack things backwards.
Yeah.
If I unpacked it from where I was in my relationship, starting back in childhood, it would have been confusing. I had to unpack it from what I had experienced most recently.
Yep.
And when I put together, like my relationship with God put together, added all of the, what I call the connective tissue between all of the occurrences and made them all make sense. And that's how I came to understand like the silver lining and not have any, really any animosity towards my son's father. Like I can't hate him. I can't.
Do they have a relationship, your son and his father?
At this point, my son, he doesn't want to, and this is recent.
Okay.
He spent the longest time period with his dad since we had been gone, actually, with him over Christmas break, about 9 days. And I thought everything went fine. Well, my son came home, he was okay, no problems. And he's a very vocal child. If something's wrong, he will tell me. And just one day in January, he came up to me and he was bawling, like out of control, crying. I'm like, what is wrong? And we sat down and it just all poured out of him what he had experienced with his dad in December. And I wrote it all down. And once he wasn't like emotionally flooded, he started talking like a little adult. He said, I don't want this to happen anymore. I don't want this to happen anymore. If I'm going to see him anymore, this has to happen and this has to happen. And I'm like, okay. So he doesn't want to spend any more than 2 days with him anymore. And he said, Mommy, if he does this, it's down to 1 day and maybe phone calls. And when his dad calls, I have to ask him, I'm like, honey, do you want to talk to your dad? And sometimes he's, okay. And other times he's, no, Mom, I don't. He doesn't. And that's the one thing I didn't want to happen. I thought that maybe if I were out of the way, that would free up the space for them to really have a great relationship. Because like he really looked up to his dad. Like his dad is like this huge figure. His dad's 6'7", and he's bigger than everybody else's dad. And he always wanted his dad to come up to the school and all his friends see his dad. And now it's just, he doesn't want that anymore. And it, for lack of a better word, it really sucks. It really does.
Yeah. That's a shame. I guess that relationship will evolve over time and you'll just have to see what happens.
Yeah, I hope.
But you are armed with the information to help. There's lots of information out there about having a parent who's a narcissist and how you can deal with that you'll be able to help him moving forward. Oh my goodness. I want to ask you a couple of questions just about you, because you're such a strong woman and you're such an amazing example of what someone can accomplish who's been through a rough time. And so I want to know, what do you love about yourself?
I love that I have the courage to look inward. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to do anything else. I love that I genuinely like myself. I've never wanted to be anyone but myself. Even as a kid, I wanted to improve upon myself. I wanted to be the best person that I could be. And even as a kid, the term, I think it Gandhi who said, be the change you want to see in the world. I think it was Gandhi. Mm-hmm. I remember that stuck in my head ever since I was a kid. I want to be the best person I can be. And in order to do that, you have to be willing to look inward and not be afraid of what you find, and be willing to tackle that and nurture it if it needs nurturing, heal it if it needs healing, learn about it if it needs, I don't know. You just have to be willing to do the hard work for yourself.
Yeah, self-development, really, because you can't help others until you have the oxygen mask on yourself, really. Yeah. So what do you think life has been trying to teach you?
Life has been trying to teach me that I am not too much. I always felt like I was too much for people. I'm a very big personality. I'm a highly sensitive person, and I'm also a girl, and I'm also a Cancer, and I'm also a creator. So there's a lot going on inside this package. And I always felt like I was too much for people.
Huh.
And I always felt like I was different, which I didn't have a problem with. I like being different.
Let's segue that into what do you think are the biggest lessons of life?
I think the biggest lesson in life for everyone is to be yourself.
Mm.
And I know we hear that all over the place. I know that's on every soapbox in the world right now, but that is the most important thing in the world. I find that everybody is clamoring after examples of how to be and how to live and how to think and how to look. I'm like, God made me the way I was supposed to be. God made you the way you were supposed to be. He gave each and every one of us gifts that we're supposed to live our life cultivating and developing and living off of and inspiring others to do the same from. So
yeah, to be yourself, to find yourself and to embrace yourself.
Yeah.
I always say that it's to learn the lessons you're supposed to learn. That's why we're here, I believe, in this school of life, is to learn certain things, and that's different for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting when you think of it that way. Maybe what life has been trying to teach you is all about standing on your own 2 feet, even though you do that continually. But maybe being an example for others too, now that you've made that transition, like you had to really be immersed in that experience of having to do that for yourself.
Yeah.
So that you can now teach it to others.
Absolutely. I 100% believe that, because I wouldn't have experienced what I experienced, and I wouldn't have the gifts that I was given if that wasn't the goal, if that wasn't the point. Martial arts gave me the grit and the discipline, and the creativity was God breathed. And then the experience with the molestation and the bullying and the domestic abuse was, I guess, the catalyst to give back.
Yeah.
And the creativity, the acting, the writing, the eventual directing, that is a platform to be able to impact the world. Because I'm finding in my research and talking to all these different people in this field, I'm finding that every single human being on the planet has or is experiencing some kind of trauma. And in my psychological study as well, trauma affects the brain.
Oh, yeah.
The same way, whether it be a drive-by shooting or a war or childhood trauma, it affects the brain the same way. So if you can figure out how to combat or eradicate domestic violence, you also are finding a way to eradicate trauma as well.
Is that how we can fix the world?
Yes, it is. 100%. You teach people how to thrive, not teach, but show them. If you show people an example of how to thrive and lead them through it, show them that there is support, show them that there are tools, show them that there is a space for them to come and seek help if they need it, whenever they need it. Show them that it's there and that you can do it, and you can come out of it being an action star. You can come out of it being what you always dreamed you could be. If you want to be a painter or an incredible professor, whatever it is that was given for you as your gift, all you have to do is turn inward and work on thriving, and that is possible. And that you won't cause anyone else any more trauma, because you will be so overflowing with that light that was put inside of you in the first place that there will be no need for you to act out on anyone else.
Imagine if we could do that for everyone and just have a whole new generation of people who would not cause trauma, no bullies. World.
Possible.
It is possible. It is possible. What about your blessings in your life? What are your biggest blessings?
God and my son. Yeah.
And where do you see yourself in the next 2 years?
In 2 years, I will have one of my films in the can done. In 2 years, we will live in our dream home. In 2 years, William will have gotten into the private school that I've been trying to get him into for like ever now. In 2 years, I will have a handle on being able to sustain my personal alignment, not necessarily on my own, but I'll be really good at it. I won't
Mm-hmm.
need any leadership outside of God in order to continue to sustain that. I will be fully my greatest self. I've just recently, maybe a few months ago, stepped into my greatest self and using my greatest voice. So I'm in the learning phase of that on that level. And so it requires understanding these new types of relationships and establishing new types of boundaries and things like that. But in 2 years, I will fully be my greatest self.
Do you think that you will find love outside of your self-love?
Like a relationship?
Yeah.
If that's meant for me, yes. I want that if God wants it for me.
Yeah.
Right now, I don't have the capacity for it.
Yeah.
Because there's so much inner work going on. I'm still trying to establish my career to the point where we're solid and really being able to live off of that and get William into the school that he really needs to be in. There's too much work going on.
Yeah.
And I have what I love. So I don't have the capacity for a whole nother human being else. Right.
I think it's fantastic that your focus is on the self and the self-love and your career and your responsibility for William. There's so much going on, and the energy, the love that you have already for yourself, it really comes off of you like a sunbeam. Like, it's just beautiful. It's really beautiful. And I'm so glad that you're in this place. You're definitely here to do something special. And I love that I'm sorry that you had to go through all the things you had to go through, but they were pieces of the puzzle that had to come together to put you where you are right now.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
I love it. Thank you, Symone. This has been a fantastic conversation, and I'm really honored that you would share yourself so vulnerably with everyone. And I just wish you all the love and joy and good health for the future. And I can't wait to see what happens with your life and where you go and follow your journey.
Thank you so much. I plan to have a couple of films here going on. So
I can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you.
If something's going to be out there, I would love to know so I can put out the updates.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Oh, yeah.
I'll let you know.
Oh, my gosh. Just let me know.